Given that this is a tell your story webinar, I thought I would just share a little context of who I am and how I ended up in this place to be giving this presentation today. So I'm based in Canmore, Alberta. I was in Calgary until the pandemic, and now I'm out in the mountains. I've worked in conservation around the world. So I've worked in Panama and Honduras in marine conservation. There's a picture of me scuba diving. Indonesia, the same, and Papua New Guinea, I've done climate research there, and also in the Netherlands. And these are the things that make me happy: climbing mountains, skiing, and scuba. I have very literally lived on the front lines of climate change. When I was in Papua New Guinea, I was researching climate impacts from an economic perspective on a low-lying island in the South Pacific. And the bottom left picture here is the island that I was living on, called Hughes Island, 800 meters by 200 meters, and potentially one of the most vulnerable nations in the world to climate change. And I went to live there for a couple of months and lived climate change and researched climate change with them. This language is undocumented, their culture is undocumented, and it was really, really impactful on me and my career trajectory to grieve the loss of climate-related deaths, attend climate-related funerals, and try to find solutions so that these people are able to stay on their island. So coming away from that experience, I think I'll always work in climate change. I don't think there's a way that I can just not do something about climate until this is solved, basically. So after that, I decided to move to Alberta, where I felt like I could have the greatest impact possible on this issue. I think Alberta has the most potential for great change and great impact. So I now work with the Pembina Insitute, and that's who I'm here today representing. We're a nonprofit think tank. We advocate for strong, effective policies to support our transition to clean energy. We do this through a number of means. We're focusing on a decarbonized electricity grid. We're trying to shift off of fossil fuels. We want a competitive economy, a transportation system that is ideally electrified, and also efficient homes and buildings. And me. So my work is sort of overarching over all of those files. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I work on the how do we communicate this topic to a variety of regions in polarized environments, and how do we take on this super challenging topic when it can be even hard to talk to our family, never mind our workplace communications about things like climate. So I'll give you a short overview of what the Alberta Narratives Project is today. We're going to talk about values-based communications, and then I'm going to share results with you. So what we've found does work in Alberta and does not work in Alberta. And then I'll leave you with some takeaway principles and some resources, some at-a-glance resources to just get your key points for how to implement this in your workplaces and your lives. So setting the stage for who we want to engage with, and also the potential of engagement. This is 2021 data showing that 45% of Albertans, I believe right now, are concerned about climate, but not necessarily engaging on it. So typically you can assume that 25% of the population being alarmed are probably taking action, probably voting based off climate values, probably participating in something in their community to do with climate change, but that 45% of people is just your average Albertan who knows that things are changing and they don't really know what that means for their lives or how to act upon that, and they don't necessarily understand the complexities of the science, which why would they? But that is our really big opportunity to create changes by engaging those people. And you know, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, Alberta, why would I want to do this in Alberta? Why would I want to fight this fight? But alternatively, I think Alberta is, as I mentioned, the greatest place to have impact. So if we can really create meaningful climate change action in Alberta, we can do it anywhere. And additionally, there are other regions of Canada that, you know, it's 85%, 90% plus of people who are willing to take climate action. And preaching to the choir, I don't think is a great use of my time. So my goal is to figure out how to engage a polarized audience and create change in that dynamic. So what is the Alberta Narratives Project? So this is a project that we launched a couple of years ago now. It took about 10 months start to end. And we wanted to figure out how to engage average Albertans on the topics of climate and energy as a response to the increase in polarization, which we still see is a major problem right now. So this picture is what we did. We convened Albertans from 75 different organizations or regions of the province. So anyone who we could think of who might constitute a quote unquote Albertan. So youth, seniors, students, teachers, healthcare workers, oil and gas workers, environmentalists, faith groups, new Albertans, new Canadians. And we got everyone into a room and trained all of these people how to go and have open, honest, candid roundtable conversations with their peers about climate without a researcher in the room. So kind of like a focus group, but a little more citizen social science aspect of that. And what that does is really remove that element of what someone thinks they should say because there's someone jotting down notes and analyzing them. And this, to our knowledge, this is the world's largest citizen social science experiment that's been done, or research that's been done. And so we sent them all on their way, and they went and collected a lot. Oh, well, first I should say, here's our partners who we worked with to make this happen. It was fairly large scale work. So they went and collected all of this data. My favorite number is the 2,410 pages of narratives that we had to analyze. And my apartment was an absolute disaster of papers everywhere as we're combing through all of this. We ended up having 55 different workshops. About 500 people participated in these conversations. And then we took from this an overarching, what we call meta-narrative of what all Albertans have in common around these topics and values and what makes them happy to be Albertan. And we also derived 7 sub-narratives. So from these groups that I mentioned, we really dove into how to engage with each one of those groups individually. And we did write 2 reports from that, the meta-narrative report and the sub-narratives report, but I have some additional resources that I can plug later as well. So what did we hear in all of this paperwork? From an energy professional, we heard, I'm not a denier, but at the same time, I believe climate change is being used as a political tool to push a certain agenda. It's like a religion. A rural Albertan said, if I say climate change is real, maybe my son won't have a job if we shut off the tap tomorrow. Another energy professional, sure, I'm concerned about climate change. My concern is the people that are using climate change to disrupt my livelihood. So this is the base knowledge that we're working with here. This is where we're coming from. This is the dialogue that is still happening in Alberta, and this is what we need to be able to engage with. So before I get into the results and what we learned from all of this data, I want to talk a little about values-based communication, because ultimately what we leaned into with this analysis is how to speak to Albertan values. So I want us to do a little bit of diving into what is values-based communication so that you can understand how to implement that better. And I'm going to ask actually Bree or Marissa to help me out here if you are able to look at the chat, because I have a question, and I think if I find the chat, I might end up going out of this screen. But my first question is for our engaged group. What would you say is the main thing that makes you proud about being an Albertan? Oh, and or what's great about living in Alberta? We'll do both questions at once. So feel free to type it into the chat. Sorry to make you work. I know webinars are taxing.
Someone answers, we'll let you know.
Even Bree and Marissa, what makes you proud to be Albertan? Or what makes you happy to live in Alberta?
I think personally, my favorite part of living in Alberta is the beautiful landscape and the mountains and the natural areas that we have, our provincial parks and things like that, being able to get out in nature and being so close to it.
Absolutely, definitely.
We
And
have
we, sorry,
we have Rod saying that prairies are in my blood.
cool.
Mackenzie Velders says resiliency.
Mhm.
Raquel Thoreau says we love our land. Jen Herrick says the diverse and wonderful landscape. Crystal
Mhm.
says the land, the mountains. Yeah, a lot of people are really talking about the land and the landscape that we live in.
Totally.
And YYC Growers says it's libertarian and entrepreneurial ethic and the amazing diverse landscape.
Yeah. That's actually, you guys basically nailed it and just told me exactly what we found in our findings. And this is a shared value that all Albertans have in common. First of all, what came up more than anything is our beautiful landscape, our clean land, air, and water, and the scenery that Alberta has to offer. And then I heard a little bit about like resiliency and we're hard workers, and there's something about Albertans that we share that motivation and desire to work hard, and we're proud of our work. And that's a lot about what we heard. So already we're tapping into what most Albertans have in common. So I recognize it's a little unconventional and I can't see you, so there's no way for me, thank you for your help. There's no way for me to hold anyone accountable here. But I really, really, really think you would benefit a lot if you grabbed a pen and paper and walked through this brain exercise with me. I think that it will be really worth your time. So your assignment as an attendee, if you're washing your dishes, dry your hands, go grab a piece of paper. This is we're gonna do one exercise and then I'll start talking and you can do your thing again. But I wanna go through an exercise to really tap into who is the other. And in this scenario, we're going to use an oil and gas worker as the other because I mean, statistically, oil and gas workers are less inclined than average to take climate action or be concerned about climate. So I think they're a really good subgroup example of how to engage with a polarized audience. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you are an oil and gas worker and you are 55 years old and you've been working in the oil and gas sector since age 18. You live in, say, Fort McMurray. And I want you to think about, if you're that person, what do you value? And either put it down in the chat or write it down for yourself if you don't want to share in the chat. But I want us to go through this thought experiment together. Yeah, you said hard work, reward for your hard work, providing for your family, attaining those things that you think, are for you what constitutes a comfortable and successful life. Julia put in the chat, promise of an economic future for my children. So wanting to provide for your family, wanting to know that your family will have what you had, and knowing that your hard work will pay off. Claire says stability for younger colleagues and children possibly working in the same industry. So same comment. So yeah, so probably you're proud of your hard work. You're probably very proud of what you've built for your family. You value reward for your hard work, paycheck, providing for your family, stability. And I think that's very reasonable. So we are going to do an empathy map. I swear it's going to be worth your time. So if you have your pen and paper, write down this little map for yourself. And if you train your brain to think this way, I promise you, you will see benefits. We actually did a lot of research around the effectiveness of the Alberta Narratives Project, and those who even just attended a webinar, 85% of them felt that their personal lives, and their communication in their personal lives had improved significantly. So by making your brain go through this, I promise there's a reward. And thanks, Bree and Marissa, for sticking around and chatting this out with me. So your user is, in this scenario, your oil and gas worker, and that's your values. And I want you to think about so if you are this oil and gas worker and you value providing for your family and your hard work, what do you think about climate change? What might you be thinking when you hear about climate in the news or from like activists? When it does come up, what are you thinking about it? Fear of change, fear of the unknown. The unknown is very scary. What are the alternatives? Who can give me a softer landing? Yeah, like that fear of not being cared for or not being seen in this moment. in this perspective, is climate change actually impacting me and where I live? Yeah, there's a lot of like, well, it's not right here right now. Whereas in reality, Alberta, the BC disaster this fall probably changed that. But so I think Alberta has 7 of Canada's 10 most costly natural disasters in history. So the next thing I want you to think about is how you feel about climate change as an oil and gas worker. So we're already tapping into that a little in the chat. Thanks everyone who's entering. Dave said, yeah, you're thinking, why are you blaming me? Exactly. Like if this person has just gone their whole life working hard to provide for their family, doing what they believe is right, and what is right objectively, like it's okay to work hard and provide for your family. That would be really threatening to have people say that you are the problem, whereas it's the system that you live within. So yeah, so how are you feeling? Sarah says guilt. Yeah, I mean, if you tap into that reality that like climate change is real and I have been, part of what's contributing to it, that would be a really scary thing to confront. And guilt is a good one. So yeah, feeling threatened, feeling betrayed, feeling accused, and that would feel really unfair, misunderstood. Absolutely, Dave. Yeah, so already we're seeing how much this is exactly a problem for this person's core values. So next I want you to think about based on how you as an oil and gas worker think and feel about climate, what do you think you say about climate if the topic comes up, or if you see protesters downtown, or it's on the media a lot, so all of a sudden. What do you think you say in response to that, especially when you're around your colleagues? And Dave said, yeah, what about mining? So like, why am I the big problem here? Why is my exact job the issue? Look at all these other things. Or like, even what about other countries who, have per capita, Canada's a pretty high emitter, but there are other countries who overall have way more emissions. So why is everyone looking at me? Like, I'm not the only one doing this. Sarah says Alberta's built on oil and gas. Absolutely. Yeah. Jen says, who do they think they are? They have no idea. Totally. Yeah. Like if that messenger is putting in no effort to tap into you and your life and your values and what you are experiencing in that moment, how dare they come at me and say this? Like, they don't know me. They don't understand that I'm just doing right by my children. Absolutely, Jen. Valerie says, what am I as an individual supposed to do? I can't change, so why should I be punished? Yes, completely. It's a system that we exist within. It is not the oil and gas worker. YYC growers, everyone uses energy and consumes resources, but our work is being called up. That's the problem. Yes, that's what I really lean into with my communications too, and I'll come back to that. But how are we, as users of fossil fuels, pointing at the makers of fossil fuels and saying, how dare you? Sounds pretty hypocritical. Loving the chat, you guys. Julia says, talking about the hypocrisy. Absolutely. Sarah says, Alberta's oil revenue supports the rest of the country. Yeah, these are all really valid things that you would probably say about climate. I'm going to move on to the last one here too. So based on what you think, what you feel, what you're saying, what do you think you as an oil and gas worker do about climate change? I support politicians who say they support oil and gas. So thank you, all of you, for walking me through this exercise. And I want you to stay in this like frame in your mind right now, just for a minute. And I want you to think through how any of these messages might feel to you as an oil and gas worker. And I pulled these from, and I'm not trying to throw David Suzuki under the bus here. He's one of many quoted on the screen. And there are many more, but it's typical communications. I want you to read through these and think about how you feel. These are from climate nonprofits published recently. So we've got basically gratification in oil and gas companies being hit hard. We've got celebration of damage to the oil and gas sector. We have what is hard to interpret it as anything but a threat to the oil and gas sector. There's all of this joy coming from the pain of these employees. And this is really, really, really common, especially in the climate and environmental nonprofit world, this attacking language. This is not an Alberta specific phenomenon. This is across Canada. But this communication style will alienate Alberta further and will miss that golden opportunity to engage that 45% of people who are maybe mildly concerned but disengaged. And it's going to push those deniers further away. And I want you to also write on your piece of paper, if you got one out, how you would feel receiving any communication like this. So thank you for going through the thought exercise with me. And I'd encourage you to consider that framing in your interactions. I'm just going to go back to that slide as I chat for a second. Just consider that framing and consider what it feels like to step into the shoes of the other when you're talking about hard topics, and think about the implications for this. You know, if it's around the dinner table with your family, or if it's in your workplace communications, I want you to think about the implications of, you know, what if I tweaked my communication just a little bit? What could that mean for how polarized this issue is? So I'm going to talk you through now the results that we got out of this work. And note, if you're worried about jotting everything down really quickly, I'll give you all the resources you need after. So I'm happy to just chat about it at this point. So I'm going to start with what doesn't work in Alberta. And you've outlined actually a lot already what doesn't work, but that's great. You've given me things to build off of. So first and foremost, green absolutism. So this is what we mean by that pure renewables, only 100% renewables, 0% oil and gas starting right now. Like, shut off the taps today. Albertans thought that climate change is a threat overall, but not the greatest threat that we're dealing with right now. So saying that climate is the single biggest problem that we're working with was a non-starter. Oil is dirty, as in the opposite to clean energy. And this is one of my gripes with the term clean energy. It means that the opposite of that is dirty and bad. And we're not trying to tell anyone that they are dirty or bad. Yeah, shutting off the taps. So elite light is how we determined it. So basically talking how a politician would talk is not super helpful. So talking about the economy, investments and markets, like most interpersonal conversations are not about things like the economy and markets. So it's just unrelatable and impersonal and not what came up in much of any of the conversations that we heard from Albertans. And also Alberta oil is the best in the world. I wouldn't use it. There's a nuance that needs to be acknowledged. Same with the green absolutism. If you go into a conversation or communications preaching that Alberta oil is best, if you go like renewables are best, oil is the worst, and there's no gray area, you'll actually be seen as condescending and lacking the understanding of the actual issue. Albertans know that there's nuance here, and they know that it's not so straightforward. So just avoid those absolute words. Yeah, like I said, political talk. The messenger is critical. So this is why we had people go into their own communities to do this and not us. The messenger determines whether communication is safe or believed, basically. We actually found that no one needed to see a Made in Alberta plan instead of Ottawa. There was not that much anti-Ottawa sentiment that came up, believe it or not. So we don't really need to say it has to come from Alberta and be about Alberta. It just has to include all workers. Talking about the experts, not super relatable. And pipelines, where they only came up a couple of times in all of the conversations that we recorded. And when they came up, it was instant debate and polarization. So just don't. So what can work in Alberta? So you already nailed this, audience. Thank you. What do we have in Alberta that we all, most of us at least, share that we can tap into in our communications? Albertans have a great quality of life, indisputable. We have great nature, scenery, mountains. Albertans support each other. I love examples of like the 2013 floods or the Fort McMurray fires where Albertans came together and helped their neighbors, whether or not they knew each other. It was, I wasn't in Calgary at the time, but all of the stories I hear is of strangers showing up to sandbag other people's homes. Albertans come together in hard situations. We work hard. Albertans we innovate, and there's a lot of people who moved here because they're excited about what they're doing and they have ambitions for their careers, and things happen here. This is a center of what's going on. So if we're tapping in, I wanted to provide these as examples of speaking to audience values that I took from more climate nonprofit websites. This is actually from Protect Our Winters, and they're speaking to skiers about the threat that skiing faces. So it's the best way to say, like, here's what you might feel concerned about climate change, not me. Like, I'm not trying to tell you to value what I value. Here, skier, this is what you value. Let's talk about the impact of climate on skiing, which I think is really, really brilliant communications. Gratitude. Anytime I go into communications around this topic, I lead with gratitude. I live in Alberta, which means I benefit from oil and gas. I don't pay PST. I drive an SUV into the mountains every weekend. I hate my home with natural gas. I have benefited significantly from the oil and gas sector in this province, and I am not going to try to deny that. So by leading with gratitude, it can establish that common ground really quickly. Showing respect for people who work hard in the oil and gas industry, as they deserve. And oil and energy resources are precious and should be valued. It's a great way to tap into that really deep appreciation for our land and our resources, and saying that it's important to put a cost on what we provide for Canada and the world is very reasonable. And like I mentioned earlier, acknowledgement of nuance is really important. Don't pretend it's easy. Don't pretend it's straightforward. It's not. It's hard. This is the hardest problem that mankind has faced from an environmental perspective so far. Like it's so deeply complex. It's a wicked problem. So no, the shift is not going to be easy. We're not trying to claim that's the case. Climate change is challenging and complex, super tough, but hey, Albertans come together and we do tough stuff. So we're ready for it. And protecting is a value that came up a lot. And I think you can probably see that oil and gas worker who's 55 years old wanting to protect what he has and what he has built for his family and protect his family. We want to protect our quality of life in this province. We want to protect our nature that we love. Facing a challenge, we work together and we pull together, support, protect each other when there's extreme weather. And we've seen a lot of extreme weather. And this is really emerging as a really critical piece that we need to talk about, especially as the government and industries are setting net zero targets. There is fear around what does that mean for the average Albertan? What does that mean for me as a worker? So it's important to make sure that you acknowledge that the transition has a role for everyone. And there's a lot of evidence to this, and Pembina has published jobs reports showing the potential for new jobs in the sector. But it includes everyone, and it includes women. We published a paper in the fall showing the potential or the current barriers for women in Alberta's energy sector, and now we're leaning into the potential for policy that will bring women along on their journey. And it does include everyone. It includes all Albertan sectors, and it's important that we allow for everyone who is involved in this, which is all Albertans. It's important to provide a voice for oil and gas workers, Indigenous peoples, women, and so on. And similar to that value that you laid out at the start too is security. And that it's dangerous to depend too much on one sector. That's volatile. And oil and gas is not super secure. And we need to diversify the economy. And that's all pretty well received overall, and that our transition should be a secure transition. So that means including everyone, jobs for everyone, no one's left behind. Albertans build, and change happens. It's part of natural cycles, and we need to build stronger foundations and diversify and spread the load to make sure that we're more resilient in the long run. Obviously, it's not easy. We've talked about that. And the word transition in particular didn't have one strong reaction, but we did find that it's important to talk about transitioning towards the good rather than transitioning away from the bad. So if you're talking about all this change, it's change to good things, not change away from how we are. And leaders talk about hard things. Albertans talk about hard things. It's hard to talk, but that shouldn't mean that we're silent on an issue. And it's important to respect everyone's perspective, as we've just done. And it's okay to hear criticism, and responsible leaders talk about the hard stuff. And this is the hard stuff. So let's not shut down the conversation. So there's a lot of content really quickly. So, and I'll share my slides with you after too. But as a recap, here's your 10 key principles to take away. Lead with respect and empathy for your audience. Validate their role in the climate and energy transition. Build your messaging, your values, from their values, and use their keywords and use their language. Their own narratives. Draw support from trusted sources. So that doesn't need to mean Justin Trudeau or Jason Kenney. It can be someone who is like them. If you're talking to a healthcare worker, look at other healthcare workers' perspectives on the impact of climate change on health. Like, it's talk to their values. Take them as far as they're willing to go. So this is a really important thing to mention, which is no two polarized people will ever find that perfect agreement in one conversation. So if you can inch 2 inches closer to common ground in any one conversation, consider that a success. So, and also set reasonable expectations for yourself. And you haven't failed if you haven't convinced someone of anything in one conversation. Just inching closer with time and finding shared values with time will get there, and that is a success. Have an open discussion, honest, keep it real, allow it to happen, don't shut it down. And align actions with audience's strengths. So this is a really interesting point to make too, which is if you're talking to a small business owner who's really passionate, for example, about the products that they're selling, and you're talking about climate change, maybe what they can't relate to is like buying an electric vehicle or flying less or eating less meat, but maybe what excites them is sourcing their business supplies from more sustainable sources. So lean into what they want to do and what they can do, and no one needs to be perfect, but if everyone just does their best and puts their energy into what is reasonable for them, you're far more likely to see action and results. Make sure your narrative leads to positive outcomes and you're talking about transitioning to the good, and test it. If it doesn't work, change it. Keep learning. This is not the Bible. So use this knowledge and continue to evolve as things change. Every month the narrative changes. So that's all the content. I'll share with you some resources now so that you know where to look. This is all free online on our website, and I'll plug that in the chat too. It's albertanarrativesproject.ca. So this is the report of the meta-narrative of how to engage on this topic with all Albertans. And then this is the second report with sub-narratives. They're pretty hefty reports. I think there are 50 to 70 pages between the two of them. And the sub-narratives dive into these audiences, which I mentioned earlier. I didn't mention small c conservatives means self-identified conservative value people, not necessarily conservative voters. Business leaders, youth, Canadians, oil gas workers, environmentalists, and rural Albertans. And then we have some at-a-glance tools to keep it super simple and super easy for you. So this is what those look like. We have a number of different tools. We have, I think, a 2-pager, a 4-pager, some graphics. Those are all also free for download on the website. This is open source stuff. Take it, use it, share it with your colleagues. You're not overstepping if you engage with this. I should also mention too, and I forgot to lead with this, the Pembina Institute did lead this work, but in partnership with Alberta EcoTrust and Climate Outreach. Climate Outreach is the world leaders on climate communications. They're based out of Wales, and they wrote the IPCC report on how to talk about climate change. So we worked with George Marshall from Climate Outreach. He came out to Alberta and helped us design this work.